Gentlemen, the time has come once again to discuss things.
Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Geeky Gentlemen. I'm Sid Partuge. Joining me today is
Steve Baxi.
And we are here for another episode of Geeky Gentlemen History Month, the month in which we discuss the contributions that geeky gentlemen have made to history, but that have been ignored by biased educational system, except none.
And by liberal reformers. Don't forget the liberal reformers.
Oh, don't trust the liberal reformers. So, full disclosure, this is take 2 on starting this episode. We only got like 10 minutes in or so it's not the end of the world, but today we're reviewing a couple episodes of the 1970s BBC series Fall of Eagles. I was like, Steve, watch this 13-hour fucking 1970s talkie drama thing. And he's like, no, I'm not doing all that. And I'm like, fine, watch the episodes with Vladimir Lenin. And he's like, okay, fine, I'll do that. And I'm like, yeah, because it's got Vladimir Lenin portrayed by one Sir Patrick Stewart. Yeah. So, real quick, just to get people like in the headspace for this again, the entirety of Fall of Eagles takes like a very long view of history, starting from a lot of like the beginnings of socialist revolutionary movements in the 1840s up to the end of World War I and the fall of the Romanov, the Russian, German, and Austrian empires. All three monarchs are gone by the end of World War I, which is like just this really momentous thing of history because the Romanov dynasty is like 300 to 600 years, somewhere in there. The Austro-Hungarians is the Habsburg dynasty, and that's like 900 years of history. And the Kaiser, Wilhelm II, is the shortest of these monarchies if you don't count the era of Prussia at like 3 generations. The United German Empire fall. So it's like this really big deal to see all these fall. And these episodes in particular, however, kind of stand out because the series doesn't feel the need to cover any of the other political players that come in and take over these governments, at least not to anywhere near as extensive as they do with Lenin. They give Lenin 2 full episodes just dedicated to like what he had going on. And then they check in with him a couple times throughout the episode. Other episodes focused on the Tsar. So it's really like fascinating, fascinating drama series that takes just this long look at what is arguably the greatest change in European history, in like one fell swoop with the oncoming set of World War I and the fallout from it, with all these different socialist movements, vying for power and eventually taking over these different governments. So I quite liked the series. I was in agreement with Steve though that it's not perfect. Steve, do you want to go through your like general thoughts again, just real quick?
Yeah. I liked it. I'm a little mixed on it. My big thing is that it sort of feels like a series of more like vignettes as opposed to a stronger through line narrative that I would have liked. It's got this sort of awkward energy sometimes where dialogue can feel clunky because they're walking into a room and then in that first introductory line, they're kind of telling you their whole deal before they can start having a normal conversation. It feels like one of those things that feels very much like it's designed with the audience in mind to be like, and now we're going to tell you about these guys, and then they have their conversation. But some of that clunkiness aside, I really like Patrick Stewart in this, and I really like the way he portrays Lennon. I like the condescendingness in his voice. I like that he always feels like super firm and sure of what he's talking about and closing off any sort of disagreement. It does sometimes though feel like they have all this time in these 2 episodes to like really hone in on who he is, but they just skip around a lot, and I wish we could have just held in these moments a bit longer. Like in episode 6, we go through his through the rise of this socialist party, all the way up to him basically becoming the dictator of that party, and it feels like there's all these little milestone moments in between that process that just happen a little bit too quickly. Trotsky's in this, and he gets like 3 scenes, and I feel like it feels like by the end, him and Lennon are supposed to have felt closer to each other than they end up feeling, because they only share like a couple of scenes together before then. But even so, I think my favorite scene in everything I watched is I really like that scene where Trotsky shows up at Lenin's house and they're just having a conversation about something Trotsky wrote and Lenin's core principles about what a revolution needs. I wish at the end of the day that I was watching something that was a little bit more, had a stronger serialized dramatic through line, like a real biopic kind of vibe, as opposed to just kind of skipping around. But when you get into the moments and when the performances hit, it is really entertaining.
And it is something that I think is like really carried by just the dramatic weight of the actors.
Yeah.
It's funny because probably like the biggest flaw in this is that it's just, this is before there was like the need to put on airs and like do an accent performance and have it like, you need to do at least an accent to be taken seriously if you're portraying someone from a different thing. Like, no, I am going to play Vladimir Lenin, and I am not going to lose my very British accent the entire time. Is really funny, and I just don't think you can get away with it now. But, like, it's impressive how just leaving that off to the side, not focusing on that, enables you to just be so engrossed in the performance itself. And so I was really, really impressed by that aspect of it. And just like all the performances throughout the entire series are just fucking phenomenal. I don't think anyone really gives like a bad performance in this. Even like the minor characters, just all of it feels so perfect. And I really appreciate it for that. But yeah, you're right. Like there is definitely a lot of skipping around. Again, I think that's mostly just on Lennon because the series itself is more focused on the falling monarchs, as it were. Everything's just centered around Nicholas II, Kaiser Wilhelm II, and the Austro-Hungarian emperor whose name escapes me. Like, so it's funny because, you know, it's the Archduke Franz Ferdinand that gets killed and sets off the war. He's in like one episode for not even like the whole time. They just like they introduce him in the episode in which he dies.
That's so funny.
It's kind of fascinating.
It's a good parallel to how people learn about him in history class. Because what do you know about Archduke Franz Ferdinand? Well, he died and set off World War One.
Yeah.
What more do you need to know?
I mean, it's so funny, like, how not prepared anyone was for that to be the incident. Like, the French royalty were just playing tennis when they heard, they're like, oh, send our condolences. All right, let's get back to this game. It's just nothing.
Damn.
So, yeah, but, like, it's sad, but, like, really, those are the thing that started the war. It's crazy when you think about it. But yeah, the entirety of the series, I think, gets a lot more into, and you spend a lot more time with these other characters, and so it doesn't feel like it's quite as abridged as it is with Lenin. The thing I'm more impressed about than that is the fact that like they give Lenin the screen time, and they're willing to like throw some shade at him, and you know, you have everyone saying that he's gonna be a dictator. He's, you know, they're calling him Robespierre and all this shit, which just, like, I'm assuming in 19th century was just an absolute gauntlet on the table kind of thing, but now just sounds funny.
It's so damning, but it's not at all.
Yeah, nowadays it's just, who's that? Who dat? New phone. But it's really impressive to me how like it's willing to be critical of Lenin, but also like when you get to the end of the final episode with Lenin, and it's just like this euphoric moment of everyone in Russia being so happy to see him. Like the way that the last scene we get with Lenin in this is him getting off of the quote unquote sealed train and being greeted at the station, and he's like thinking that he's about to be arrested or something for setting foot back in Russia, or like traveling through Germany to get there, and it's just like a fucking parade. And it's like, just the performance is so good that I don't give a fuck that no one's doing an accent. The look of like shock and like just pure joy that's on Patrick Stewart's face, like that mixed emotions as he's walking through the crowd, is so fucking good. And like everyone's singing the International, and you like see the Red Guards are like crying, they're so happy that he's here. Just like, that's a really like big deal to, like, especially to leave that as the final note for Lenin, not to try to, you know, focus on the good or bad that he did after that, but just to like leave that Lenin's back in Russia, this is like the most exciting and euphoric moment, is so crazy to me. Like, I legit think that whoever wrote that scene was just, you know, was a Lenin fanboy and could not bring themselves. Because, you know what's interesting is the final image we're left with is it just does a freeze frame on Patrick Stewart as Lenin, and then has the little subtitle come up with Vladimir Lenin 1870 to 1924 or whatever it is. And no one else gets that. They don't do that for anyone else in the entire series.
It is really interesting too to do that and frame Lenin's rise to power in that way when you're making a show in the 70s in Britain, in the midst of the Cold War, and thinking kind of in retrospect, is there maybe a sort of nostalgia in that moment of like, man, I wish Lenin got what he wanted, because if he did, we wouldn't be stuck in this Cold War, or some sort of like oversimplification of the state you're in right now and what it could have been when Lenin rose to power. There is a sort of a lot of jabs at him when he first shows up. In episode 6, like all the arguments they're having in the party meetings about how they need to frame what the party's policies are, and just trying to delineate between the people who could actually be revolutionary and the people who are really just kind of there in proximity, and having the arguments about like, should Jewish people be allowed as part of the party, or are we dealing with the peasantry who are just going to hitch their wagon to the liberal reformers later and not actually have a revolutionary consciousness. And like as those debates are going, it feels like that episode has this real sort of clear like, oh man, this guy is tyrannical, this guy's too extreme, he's going to alienate everyone, he doesn't want to deal with the injustice he's going to cause as a person because he's so consumed by this mission to overthrow Russia. And then afterwards, it's not that at all. Because like you said, it feels almost nostalgic for him by the end.
Mm-hmm. And it's interesting because I think the common like Westerner or capitalist critique of Lenin is that despite maybe the highs of his ideas, if you want to like see beauty in them, nothing was ever real to him. That like the workers were always theoretical workers, the deaths were always like numbers on a page to Lenin. And I don't agree with that. There are clear moments that are just, again, back to the previous episode, or the episode we started the month with, what's left out. Like it's easy to create that narrative if you're willing to leave out him literally like pouring his soul out over the people that are dying for his mission. So but like there is something to that, in that like Lenin is the person that is willing to be in charge, is willing to make the unpopular decisions. I think a really, really good moment of that, and I did a little bit more external research on this because I hadn't, in my early Soviet reading, I hadn't come across this incident talked about. But the show decides to focus on an incident of a party member coming all the way out of Russia to where the where Pravda is being worked on, the underground newspaper is being worked on, to file a complaint and get like the central committee of the Communist Party to censure or kick another member out for essentially a rape allegation, that the guy raped his wife and got her pregnant, and she killed herself in shame, and like so he wants this other comrade removed from the party. And like they frame it as Lenin hearing this story, like not insisting to hear the story from the guy, but to hear the details before he even is willing to hear the guy out. And then it's like, you know, it's this really shocking moment where he goes, no. Mm-hmm. And like it seems, you know, jaw-dropping. It seems just super controversial, and it immediately sets the female member of the committee against him, and she's another real revolutionary who'd done some shit in Russia, like before Lenin was even born, if I'm remembering it correctly. And she just can't stand him and thinks that like he's completely amoral. Like she's got this idea that the party is supposed to be the party of like true morality, and to let something like this slide is just the height of hypocrisy. And like everyone's mad at him for this decision, and maybe they should be. The information I looked up, maybe they embellished it a little bit, I don't know. The information as I looked up said had an affair, it didn't say raped. So I don't know enough about the case. I just did a quick like Wikipedia search for it, so I wasn't I don't know 100% of the details. But like to frame it this way is still a choice from like a writing perspective. And I think what it shows, like in a surprisingly balanced way, is it is shocking. It is inherently like it rips people apart. But like Lenin's actual argument is not that what the guy did was right or wrong. It's that what he did has nothing to do with his effectiveness as a revolutionary. So he's an effective rebel. He is an effective agent for us. And so we cannot get rid of him for something that has, like, in and of itself, nothing to do with the revolution. And I thought that was like, you know, it's a very controversial, it's very unpopular to make a call like that. But it is, whether or not it's the right or wrong call, it is a hard call for like a leader to make. I saw that all happen, and it reminded me of a couple of years ago when like the Democratic Party kicked a member of the Senate out, like basically forced him to resign over some leaked picture he'd taken while over visiting troops, and he'd done something kind of vaguely inappropriate with a female soldier, just like as a gag for the camera. And like they ushered him out over it. I'm like, Yeah, no, I mean that. Not sitting here defending what he did, but did that have anything to do with like his actual policies, where he stood on issues? And so we're still dealing with very similar topics of conversation, very like, admittedly uncomfortable and awkward things all these years later. And so like you have, Lenin portrayed in this way, where I would consider that tough but fair, because he did stand up for crap like that. He was willing to accept some of those things for his like wider goal. And was that right or wrong isn't really the issue. The issue was, what does this mean for the revolution?
Yeah, yeah. Something about Lenin that I feel like doesn't get enough credit is he wasn't just a purely ends justify the means kind of guy. Like there was nuance to it, and he was making hard decisions all the time. I like that scene in part because when that other guy is arguing with him about it, about like he has to do this, how it makes him look bad as a person, and like who you are as a person is who you're going to be in power and as a revolutionary and all that. And Lenin just like dismisses him and calls it metaphysics and says it's got nothing to do with the practical limits of what's going on here. But in like the core of what Lenin wrote about and what Lenin talked about, there is always this very real problem that even today we have a hard time reconciling, which is just because there is a certain kind of class of people that have vaguely the same interests as you, it does not mean that they actually will advance or do the thing that you need them to do in the moment. That a bunch of people could be against Trump in theory, but how many of them will actually, when it comes down to it, decide to go and vote against him or do something that would inconvenience him? And Lenin's whole thing at
What
the
a
end,
great time to be talking about
right?
this, huh, Steve?
I know, right? But like Lenin's Lenin's whole thing at the end of the day was like, class consciousness is not a sufficient condition for a revolution. A bunch of people have class consciousness. Your economic circumstances put you empirically in a certain class, but that's not the same thing as having a revolutionary capacity, and it's not the same thing as creating mechanisms or structures that allow you to enable a revolution. And when they're having those debates about essentially having a vanguard, and that same woman later calling those people just hired thugs, it's really interesting because I feel like the show, it's clearly trying to throw some shade at Lenin, but I think it's actually a lot more fair than I think this kind of portrayal has any right to be in this era. Like I would have expected it to be a lot worse against him.
Oh, I was 100% ready to go into it and just think it was going to
Yeah,
be like, evil Lennon, but I was just interested in it for Patrick Stewart, and I was quite impressed by how nuanced the take is.
yeah, because that one guy has his big argument about who should be and who shouldn't be in the party, and then Lenin's allowed to retort, and he retorts in a way that's like fairly consistent to what he has written before. So like the fact that it was kind of accurate in terms of just what Lenin actually believed, I was really surprised by.
Yeah, no, it's such an interesting time to like decide to check in on Lennon, I think. Because this is like that episode 6, is just the focus on like where the Bolshevik Menshevik split was, because before that it is just one party, and like the discussions over the board membership of the underground newspaper, and who's like gonna be the editors of it. Lenin makes this move because beforehand he was like trying to get more votes on the board. He was trying to get Trotsky on the board so he could have more members to, get more of what he wanted passed. And that doesn't work, so his next logical thing is, well, let's go for less members. And that's kind of what this boils down to, but it's seen as like just this affront to these people that they had been emigres for so many years, and this was like all they had that connected them back to the revolution was being on this board and editorship, and like Trotsky has to live this shit down for years, and it basically ends up killing him that he splits with Lenin this early on, and just for this conference is in 1903, the revolution's in 1917. He doesn't really join up with Lenin again publicly until like a month or so before the 1917 revolution. So he looks like a Johnny come lately, even though like for years the two of them seemed split, but like all of their thinking seemed to actually be lining up, or one was like moving toward the other, just back and forth and back and forth. And so but he looks really bad, and this is the thing that basically ends up haunting him, is he splits with Lenin here, and then he spends the next 15 years just trashing Lenin constantly. In every publication, saying that he's just trying to he named his party Bolshevik to trick people into thinking he's the majority. He's playing on Russian backwardness. He's just a con man and a devil and all this stuff. It's just words literally haunt the fuck out of him to a degree that he is never able to recover from. And I think that's just really, really fascinating to see the beginnings of that being portrayed, is everyone's shouting at Lenin that he's, you're a dictator, you're going to be a dictator. I feel bad for not remembering the female revolutionary's name, but she's like, "You're worse than a czar," is like her last word before she storms out of the conference and stuff. But to the credit of this is a very well researched show, because those were the arguments being thrown at Lenin, that like what he wanted was just all going to be top down. He didn't want any dissent in the ranks, and these are like serious problems that Lenin kind of like shrugs off and says it's not going to be that big an issue, and he gets a lot of people to go along with him, including Trotsky. Trotsky spends all these years kind of disavowing it and denying it and saying, like, pointing out the problems with it, but then he joins the party, and then he starts to get on board with a lot of these things, and it's these mentalities that end up becoming a problem, less so for Lenin, but a lot of the things that people are throwing at Lenin is what Stalin ends up doing. Stalin runs with these precedents that Lenin and Trotsky and all these Central Committee members had agreed to in principle, kind of like for the moment, and Stalin just makes them like the tenets of the party going forward.
Yeah, and to that point, there's that one scene where they're all arguing towards the end, after Lenin's basically solidified what his definition of the party is going to be, and that one guy's like, "I reject my nomination." He's like, "By the bylaws, you can't do that. You're going to be made to serve." I'm like, oh shit, that really does feel like one of those things where it's like as close to foreshadowing as you could get in that moment historically.
No, I mean it is, and like he keeps running into a lot of things. Like the one I loved, the scene that I loved from that episode, is when Lenin calls like a secondary conference of his supporters into one room.
Oh, and locks the door?
And that just keeps the door like held shut until they finish their discussion, and then lets the guy in.
That's
and
so
tells
good.
him how it's going to be.
That's so good.
Yeah, it's really interesting. There is a really solid argument, and again, I don't necessarily agree with it 100%, but I think you can make a really solid argument about Lenin being the perfect example of the path to hell is paved with good intentions.
Mm-hmm.
Like all of these, and Trotsky ends up agreeing with him on a lot of these. All of these baby steps toward absolute dictatorship and absolute rule of the party, identifying the party with the proletariat, they all go along with it until suddenly it's not working for them anymore, and then they have problems with it. Is kind of how it works out. They're all 100% down to vote on and agree on these things. Trotsky writes a whole paper like justifying the use of state terror in regards to cleaning up the reactionary parties in the Civil War. And it's hard not to read that paper and then look at what Stalin did, and it's like, you were fine with it when you were the one holding the reins of power. You stopped being fine with it when it was used against you. Is kind of what it comes down to.
Well, and it's again, it's hard to watch this and not think about like everything that's happened in the last few years or the last few days or the last, where it's just like this constant stream of similar parallels. I remember when Biden was at the end of his term, and the Supreme Court made that decision about presidential authority, and that he couldn't be prosecuted for his crimes or whatever, for that Trump couldn't be prosecuted for his crimes or whatever. And everyone's like, okay, great. So now Biden's going to use that precedent set and just do whatever the fuck he wants because he can't be prosecuted for it, right? And then he doesn't do that. But there is that sort of like problem that you run into in any sort of politics where you want the person who is making the decisions to have a certain degree of unlimited power when they are good intentions, depending on how you define that. But then the second you set that precedent, someone who doesn't have those same intentions is going to abuse them. When you go back to like for a lot of people, the best president the United States ever had with FDR defied the Supreme Court like on a regular basis. There's so many legal arguments and stuff that he did in the New Deal that at the time just straight up wasn't legal. But did he arguably do a lot of those things and enshrine them in American politics to a point where they're better for society? And the answer is, it's just, to a lot of it, is yes. But then you're getting the exact same thing sort of happening now where like, well, now Trump's doing all these things which are clearly and blatantly illegal, but now it's bad because they're all bad things. And that's just not a thing you can control. And so like as much as you want Lenin's logic to be right, and as much as it makes sense within a context, there is going to be a cost to pay for that down the line, and he's not going to be the guy who has to answer for it.
100%. And like there's arguments of, people will say that Lenin wasn't a dictator, and other people say that he 100% was by the time he died. And then Stalin had to come through and like reconsolidate all the power that Lenin had. And that's like, it's an interesting argument, but like the fundamental idea of it is that there's very little that Stalin did that did not, like, was not rooted somehow or other in actions from Lenin.
Right.
And so that's just, again, people don't like that. There's this really interesting dynamic where, well, we all agree Lenin good, Stalin bad, or, well, unless you really, really don't like communism, then you hate Lenin too. So the people that really don't like communism try to tie everything Stalin did to Lenin, and the people that really don't like Stalin but like Lenin try to create this gulf between them and try to say, like, see, no, Trotsky. And it's like, no, but Trotsky was kind of on board with a lot of the stuff, and it's just awkward to talk about. Like, Stalin's best move against Trotsky was adopting his policies after he exiled him, because then he had no support network for a couple of years. And it just, like, what do you say to that? This was going to be the one that was good. He did all the shit that Trotsky wanted to do. Like, he did it wrong, according to Trotsky, but, like, that's, you start getting to a real subtle difference here. And so there's this interesting dynamic of trying to separate these things, and again, it doesn't matter whether or not you agree with them. There is the fact that this narrative distinction does exist. The fact that these narratives are created is irrefutable, and so what do you do with it? They can't all be 100% wrong. someone like they're doing research on this. They're pointing to these instances. You can't just say, well, that didn't happen though.
And there's a good encapsulation of like the way they want to do this, because at the end of the day you're piecing these facts together, you're using the research that's available to you, and you're essentially putting your best interpretation out there, and then there's still going to be a little bit of bias based on who's writing it. Like there's no way around that.
Mhm.
And there's moments where I feel like you mentioned, like the end of the episodes always have like these little hooks, and those feel the
Mhm.
most like that moment of hindsight coming in and trying to give you this little bit of a punch of like, and we kind of see where this went. And episode 6 has that really great bit at the end where Lenin and Trotsky are talking, and Lenin's talking about how history is going to remember this, and Trotsky says it depends on who's writing the history. I'm like, oh, that's so good.
Yep.
That's so
No,
good.
it is. Like the fucking every episode ends with a fucking mic drop, and it's so cool.
It's so cool, yeah. I do really truly wish I got to see more of that Trotsky Lenin dynamic, because I feel like so
Mhm.
much of that is the underpinning of those episodes, of the Lenin episodes. The whole conflict and the whole debate about whether or not Lenin's a good leader really just boils down to, I think, like narratively and emotionally, to his relationship to Trotsky. And I just wish the show had more time to flesh that stuff out so that it could hit hard.
No, I really do agree with you. Like I said, there is an episode that like focuses on a scandal with the Austrian court and like getting rid of the crown prince's body and his teenage lover that he murder suicide with. And it's like I'm not saying that that's not important and it doesn't like inform the course of events, because without that you wouldn't have like Franz Ferdinand becoming the heir apparent and blah blah blah. Like that's important, but also I would have taken more of Lenin and Trotsky, or just more of Lenin. You and I've talked about this a little bit. I don't actually really like Trotsky all that much, and it's funny to say that now because I'm like almost done with my Trotsky book, and it is like it's hard not to just feel with someone on like a purely emotional level when you hear about like the circumstances in which their fucking child died and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So like I'm getting closer with that, but I still just have like this knee jerk like reaction to him because of like other stuff. So it's interesting to see him here, and like he is. I think the actor that they get for him, it like he kind of plays it right where like Trotsky was a genius, and the problem is that he fucking knew it. Cause he's young when he first meets Lenin, and the events that they're like going over here. He's like 22 or some shit at this point. And yet he's sitting there like talking to all these professional revolutionaries and all these other like clandestine organization members, and he's like lecturing them, and he's sitting there talking down to Lenin and kind of like looking down on him and being all like disgusted by him. And it's funny because Trotsky writes on this is like the biggest controversy of his life, that again it gets him killed, it gets him exiled. That he begins to feud with Lenin over these events. Because he writes on it later in life that, like, in retrospect, politically I agreed with Lenin. I was just so ashamed as a young man for, like, to see my heroes of the revolution treated in this way, even though they clearly weren't evolving with where the revolution needed to go. And that's why I reacted this way. I'm like, that's why you reacted this way for 15 fucking years? Okay. Like, it doesn't look good. It's, like, I guess to give people kind of a, if you're just watching this and you don't really know all the context behind it, it's on the same par as, like, J.D. Vance sitting there talking about Trump would be, like, America's Hitler, and he's a never Trump guy. And then, like, now he's, like, vice president. It's just that weird contradiction of, like, like, technically, I guess it worked out for his career, but, like, if Trump kicks the bucket, he's gonna have a hard time still rallying support based on like those very pointed accusations. And that's kind of what ended up happening to Trotsky is he, by all like measure, probably should have been the one to take over after Lenin died, and Lenin tried to prepare the ground for him as much as he could, but just nobody liked him. And a lot of it comes down to what we see happen here. Which is just really fascinating to show that split.
So on that same page, before we get too far away from the Trotsky side of it, when you were watching this, was there anything that stood out to you about him or his relationship to Lenin that you thought was either missing and necessary or just inaccurate from what you've read?
No. You talked about really liking their conversation that they have in the apartment, and a lot of that is like boiled down from just actual stuff that they both wrote about each other at that time when Trotsky was staying with them in London. They just kind of like boiled down literal quotes from the two men into a single scene of dialogue. So I thought that was really cool, and the fucking mic drop at Karl Marx's grave. One of the few location shoots that they do the entire
Might have been a touch on the nose, but it was worth it.
I thought it was pretty good. Yeah. So like that aspect of it, I think Trotsky like, oh well, when the history books are written, you'll come out looking the villain or whatever he says. No, that's like, if anything, he's not going hard enough on Lenin. If they really want it, like they're showing the beginning of this split, like introducing Trotsky as like this follower with all this appreciation for Lenin, and then like seeing that appreciation get disillusioned really quickly. I think is literally just what happened for him. And it's funny because Trotsky does all this stuff to be loyal to the veterans of the party, and kind of stands up against Lenin. The guy, what's the name? It's not the other senior leader of the party that we see in this, that is warned that Lenin will bury him. He eventually does end up kicking Lenin off of Pravda, and he takes over Pravda, and he wants nothing to do with Trotsky. He kind of hates Trotsky, like, from get-go. And a lot of it just seems to boil down to, again, Trotsky was a genius and he knew it. Is, like, the guy just didn't like how smart Trotsky was. And like, ego got in the way, essentially. So, for all of his trouble that he bought himself, in order to defend or stick up for his heroes of the old party veterans, he didn't even get appreciation for it, because like he was allowed to write for Pravda, but he wasn't like ever on the editorial board or anything. For all of his effort that he did against Lenin for them, he never got any real reward for it.
Dang.
Is kind of the sad part about all that. So, like, arguably the greatest political mistake he makes is... No. Greatest political mistake he makes his entire career is Lenin telling him, don't make any deals with Stalin, and then he makes a deal with Stalin. That really bit him in the ass. Again, genius, but, like, so smart that, like, goes back around and becomes kind of a dumbass again. In a way is kind of where I'm at with Trotsky.
You do
like,
kind of feel in the scenes with him and Lenin, you do kind of feel like this relationship of like Lenin really clearly like appreciates the bright-eyed optimism and knowledge that he's got, but he wants to push him in a more radical direction. And by the end, when they're facing off, he's kind of got the disappointed dad eyes at him.
Mm-hmm. And it's funny because I don't remember if this was in one of the episodes we watched, but they talk about the next time Trotsky gets mentioned, and I think the only other time he gets mentioned in the show, is during the 1905 revolution, where Trotsky is in Petrograd and... No, wait, Moscow? Pretty sure it's Petrograd. Is in Petrograd during 1905 and is the president of the first Soviets, which is just like workers' councils that kind of got together and elected representatives from different factories to go and just be like their own little parliament. And so for, I think it's 55 days, there's like this little quasi government in Petrograd, which is, or well, at that point it was St. Petersburg, but yeah. So just for like a short time, Trotsky was the president of this little government, and that gets mentioned briefly in here, and you actually see some video of real Trotsky at that period, which was kind of cool.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, but like when that happens, and Lenin, one of the few times Lenin goes back to Russia, he finds out that Trotsky's leading this Soviet, and his reaction is, well, he's earned that. So it's kind of funny, like, Trotsky has just all this, like, hate and vitriol for Lenin for years and years, and does all this, this campaigning against him because of the tendency toward dictatorship that exists in Lenin's work, or Lenin's theory. And then... But Lenin doesn't seem to, like, hit back at him nearly as hard. He always seems to approach him with like trying to get him to join his party, trying to get him to see the light, and so he'll like hit back, he'll defend himself, but he never gets like as personal as Trotsky would against Lenin, which is kind of fascinating.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting relationship, and I think that nuance. The show definitely does as much as it can to bring out that nuance, despite how little time it's got to do it. One thing that I do kind of wish we got more of, and maybe this is in some other episodes, is at the end of the day, they're always talking about the conditions of the workers. They're talking about the people in the factories, and they're having debates over the peasantry versus the people that can actually be useful and all that. But in just the episodes that I saw, I feel like we got very little, if any, actual on-the-ground idea of like what Russia was like, or who they were talking about, or the kinds of people that they were having these conversations about. And I feel like that seems necessary when so much of your ideological disagreement is about that class of people.
Again, I think that kind of goes into this idea that Lenin, for Lenin, it was all theoretical. And that is just a very popular perception of Lenin, of that, like, for him, the worker, like, he never actually talked with workers all that much. He never, again, that's not true, but that's the argument, because he didn't spend as much time with workers as someone like Mao did with the peasantry, right? He was more, he was in fucking exile. He was sitting there trying to get illegal newspapers going, and he was writing, secret messages and trying to, keep organizations together, and like organizing bank robberies to fund the whole fucking thing. So like but that is an argument that's advanced, and so I think that kind of goes into that. Some of the other episodes, like there's an episode that goes more into the 1905 revolution, and like the kind of the behind the scenes dealings and all the craziness of just how high up the corruption and the infiltration of the revolutionary movements were. But like literally there's a priest that goes to a tenement that a bunch of workers are living in, and there's a child laborer that's there and fucking like lost an arm to one of the factory machines, and they're sitting there trying to get the bleeding to stop. Um, and he's the priest's like watching all this happen and unfold, and so he on the strength of that basically denies the fact that he's supposed to be bought off and not actually doing anything but making the workers feel like there's someone that's on their side, and instead he decides to actually lead a march onto the Tsar's palace and try to appeal directly to the Tsar to save the workers and intervene on their behalf. And it's portrayed just fantastically with how like incompetent and or just pure evil Nicholas II was, where he hears about this and refuses to come because it would look unseemly for the Tsar to respond to a provocation like that. But what he will do is call to have cavalry troops there to, make sure that things stay calm.
Yeah,
I think the line
right.
in the episode, is the presence of cavalry troops will ensure things stay calm. It's just no, no, it won't.
Yeah.
So we've talked a lot about Leonard. And I definitely want to get back to it because we haven't talked much about the train episode, but there is some bits of Nicholas II in what we watched for this. What did you think of the portrayal of Nicholas?
I liked him. Or rather, I liked the performance. It feels like a very different world with that in that episode, where it feels like you're basically toggling back and forth between someone on the fringes with Lenin and then someone who is sheltered in a very different way with Nicholas. And I like that he feels so aloof and disconnected from everything else that's going on around him, where he's about as bland as the scenery that he's in. And I don't think that's a bad thing as far as performance. I think that's kind of necessary to get at what they're trying to do. But I liked it. I wish I had time to go back and watch more of the stuff that led up to that, because I do find that stuff really interesting too, where just the ins and outs and the drama of the actual monarchy, and how they
Well, if I'm
talk
not
about.
mistaken, we started with episode 5, right? And that's where like you see him with like the ballerina and stuff.
Yeah.
I've got that in my head, right? Yeah, no, that's his first episode.
Oh, so there's not more
that's
before that. Okay.
No, because that's you see his father die and he gets the throne and stuff. There's more with his father briefly,
Okay.
but the episodes before this were mostly focused on Austria-Hungary and Bismarck in Germany,
I
because
got you.
those are like where all the beginnings of those seeds are set. But no, the episode 5 is the first time we meet Nicholas II. I'll give you a funny factoid. So the ballerina that he's having an affair with and wants to keep as a mistress, but ends up breaking things off with, he mentions that he's getting her a mansion at the end of that. Like, that's his farewell present to her.
Yeah.
So after the February Revolution, the provisional government like freed all prisoners, which was a mistake, but freed all political prisoners as well.
Yeah, that seems like a problem.
Yeah, and so like all the Bolsheviks rushed back to St. Petersburg or Petrograd at that point, as quickly as they could, and they like all these different political factions started just taking up residence in different places throughout Petrograd, and the place where the Bolsheviks end up is that lady's mansion that the Tsar got her. And they're just in fucking ballerina's mansion.
That's awesome.
So it's pretty funny to like introduce her as such a major character in that first episode. Is they're just that they go and they live at that lady's house. That's where their offices are until they take over the Winter Palace.
Yeah, okay, that's interesting. I guess again, very similar to the other episode, I wish there was just more time to go into all that stuff, because I feel like the situation he inherited and the fact that he very clearly is not ready for everything that's about to unfold is fascinating in its own right. And I wish I just had more details about that.
Yeah, no, what you get in this is like the first time that he's introduced. His father has a couple of scenes in other episodes, but it's just more within the context of like what was going on with Bismarck and stuff.
Mm.
And so like Nikki is just, shit. Like his dad doesn't even want him to take over. I like the bit where he's like where they ask his dad about Nikki, and he's like, I've got no interest in him, and that's like kind of a bit of a running theme of like the difference between these monarchs and their inheritors, of like they don't like each other very much. They're all kind of just like vying and waiting for their chance to take over, and it's kind of crazy that you'd expect more continuity between these things of like, well, you're going to be taking over for me, so I want to educate you and empower you. And it's like, no, I don't want anything to do with you. I don't want to think about the fact that I'm going to die. That's what it comes down to. And so they're just kind of, like leaving each other alone and having a lot of distance. And Nikki just ultimately never wanted the job. And I think that's an interesting theme that isn't really played with in here, but that is very relevant to like dynamics between Lenin and Trotsky and stuff going forward. Is when you talk about like succession of power, no one actually ever really wants to be the boss, and the person that does want to, you should be the most concerned about.
Yeah.
So like when someone's like looking for that kind of power, is seeking it out, they're they might not be suited for it, but alternatively you can't make somebody take it. Part of you has to want it. And I think with Trotsky, like there's arguments of, well, he just presumed that he was so obvious the choice that he wasn't gonna degrade himself by like vying for it or whatever. I don't agree with that interpretation. I just straight up don't think that he actually really truly wanted to be the head of the government after Lenin died. And I base that on the fact that multiple times Lenin tried to get him to take over, and he said no. Wild historical like people try to justify those interactions and try to like explain it away, and I'm just like, there might be all kind of reasons and stuff for it that you can get into, but my gut feeling is just someone offering you the chance to be in charge. It sounds good, but a lot of people don't actually want to take that. That's too risky a move for them. And I think it's interesting to parallel that with Nicholas, who just does not want to be czar, but like thinks it's his duty and his like mandate from God to be the czar of all the Russias. And so I think it's really interesting to see how goddamn depressed he gets as the episodes go on, and until you get to a scene of abdication where he's like, I don't understand the function of a monarch that does not lead. Oh, it's such a fucking killer line.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things where that might have been something like he actually said or wrote down at some point, but like I do know he was very reluctant to power. But there was just kind of no one else at the time.
It is interesting too when you compare the two introductions between Nicholas II and Lenin, because Lenin has that scene that you mentioned before where he meets his future wife and he just kind of condescendingly talks to her and dismisses what she's doing, but he comes in with a lot of bravado and confidence, and like he's the guy that knows how to do the job right, versus Nicholas, where you get his opening is he's in bed with his mistress and his mistress is crying about their relationship, and like there's just these two wild dichotomies of like this is a guy who is all mission, nothing else, and here's a guy that has no sense of mission or obligation or duty.
No, it's 100%. Like he's kind of like living up the good life. I like the bit where him and his friends are just drunk and fucking around, and then someone runs into their like, with authority, and it's like, what the hell's going on there? And then they realize who they're talking to, and all that authority just evaporates away, and they're allowed to continue with their drunken bullshit. And I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
I just off the bat, fuck Nicholas II. I'm never gonna have any sympathy for that man. Like, historians are too nice to that motherfucker. I'm sorry that they killed his family. That's not cool, but still, fuck Nicholas. But like, it's hard to imagine how you wouldn't end up as someone like that, because I don't know if that exact situation happened in his real life or not, but it's not hard to imagine that it did, given the way that the czars were treated and the royal families were treated. And if someone's growing up like that, where they never really face any consequences because the only person that could punish them, their father, doesn't want to fucking see them. Yeah, like that's how else would you not end up just someone that like doesn't understand the full consequences of their actions if you never face any negative repercussions for your actions.
Mm-hmm.
One thing I think is an interesting detail, like it gets kind of, it's mentioned on the periphery, and it's like shown in like really just not subtle, but attention isn't drawn to it, I guess is the way I'd put it. When they're like looking over the pictures of the revolutionaries, and Nicholas II goes, Jews, most of them. Nicholas II, horribly anti-Semitic individual. I'm pretty sure you see. I don't know if they do it like specifically in this, but I know in reality he wore the like medal or the crest of the Black Hundreds on his uniform, which was essentially just a roving group of people that just went to Jewish villages and just tortured, killed, burnt down, and then moved on to the next. Whenever any kind of instability broke out, and they like, it was just, it wasn't ordered, it was completely independent, but it was so passively accepted and encouraged by the Tsar that he was like wearing their little banner on his chest. And again, so like the idea that, again, I feel bad, shooting his family was pretty fucked up, but I don't feel bad for Nicholas. I never fucking will. Like, so, but I like the portrayal of the character here, because you don't like get the sense that he's an evil person, but you do get the sense that he's so far removed from the realities that the real people of his country that he's supposed to be leading are facing, that he just doesn't care about the evil that is happening, and that is in and of itself evil too.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of like discussion around Nicholas and like how sheltered he was, and like while the February Revolution was going on, his staff was like messaging him that anarchy is about to break out, immediate things need to happen. He's like, look at this bullcrap that they're sending me. What nonsense. Oh, like he just doesn't even understand the like how bad things had gotten. It's pretty insane.
Yeah,
I like that his last word is what? Before they shoot him.
Even in death, he doesn't know what's going on.
Yeah, no, it's like they bring him down to a basement and they say that they're gonna execute him, and his last words are such like, what? He's just so shocked by it.
In the 3 episodes that we watched, there is an interesting trinity that kind of develops here, because you've got Kaiser Wilhelm the second in episode 12, you got Lenin in episode 6, and then you've got Nicholas in both 5 and 6, but we'll just say mostly 5. And it's interesting that these 3 guys are all kind of facing the same eternal question, and they all kind of end up in different paths. Because Lenin's the big pamphlet that everybody knows that Lenin wrote is called What is to be done, and he just goes into a theory of like what you should do in terms of creating a revolution. And over the course of his life, he wrote different things that sometimes contradict it, but that's like the big thing that he tried to instill, and it's definitely the basis for a lot of the conversations of this portrayal of Lenin. It's really consistent with that. But you do get you can use that as an interesting baseline for the other 2 guys too, because Lenin, this whole episode is focused on people disagreeing about what you should be doing in the first place. Tsar Nicholas, the second episode, is really just a comedy of errors, as far as like, here is everything you didn't even bother thinking about doing, that you were so passive throughout all of this that the question of what you should be doing never even arises to you. And then you get to the last episode we talk about, and it's almost the opposite problem of like, there were so many options in this at the end of the war, and none of them are the right one. And so you just are kind of forced into one bad corner after another.
Yeah, no, I think it's absolutely fascinating. I love the portrayal of Wilhelm II on this, because he's so cocky, but what's really funny about him is he has class consciousness. In a way that like none of the other monarchs do, because like his whole thing is he's just constantly trying to get the other monarchs to like stick together and keep things between them and not give ground to parliaments and ignore those. He wants the monarchs to work within their class interests together to stay in power. And I don't know if it's this, I think it's the last episode actually, that he's sitting there talking. He's like, I've got a cousin in Britain who's the king, cousin in Russia who's the czar. You think between the 3 of us we could have stopped this war from happening? It's like, yeah.
Yes,
what the fuck's the point of all these blood-tied monarchs if you guys are still going to end up going to war together? And it's like the worst war in history to that point. And people still try to argue that about which one is worse, World War I or World War II, and it's a tough one.
The sequel's never as good, you know.
Yeah. But like the thing World War I had going for it is the tactics had not caught up to the technology. Mm-hmm. It's really is the first industrial war, but they were still using Victorian war tactics, and that's why it's just as brutal as it became. And you have the Russian people who probably suffered the most for it because they were the most backward. They had the least level of industrialization. You mentioned earlier about not like the movie not really, or the show not really doing enough to show you the condition of the how the Russian people are living, and it does a little bit, like I said, but when I tell you, it's literally like pulling a peasant out of the Middle Ages and giving them an iPhone. Mm-hmm. That is not like a far cry. There's a lot of stories, even up into World War II, after all of Stalin's forced industrialization, or rapid industrialization might be a better word, of Russian soldiers who were peasants just being in Germany or being in Poland and just being fascinated by like basic fucking trinkets that the people there had. Mm-hmm. The kind of the eternal thing that really, really nails it home is a Western reporter asked a Russian soldier in Berlin what he thought about what this all meant, what the war meant, and his takeaway is, if they had all this, why did they come to us? It's just how... Jesus. Yeah, it's just like so candid and so perfect. So like really to see I think it's almost impossible to show, because if you showed the reality, it would look like parody. It would look insulting, I think. And again, it wasn't universal. Like, there were industrialized cities, but just the distance between those two things was so far that it's like actually unimaginable. So you have just all of these factors working together, but you have Willem II, trying to unite the monarchs and keep them all together, and then he ends up taking this devil's deal that gets his cousin and his whole family fucking murdered by helping Lenin get to Russia. And again, what's interesting there is Trotsky even said later in life, if I had not been in Russia, but Lenin was, there would still have been an October Revolution. If Lenin had not been in Russia, there would not have been an October Revolution, which is like, it sounds good and admirable and stuff, especially to write later in life. But like, it is a bit of a shocking statement for a Marxist that doesn't believe in great man history to say. Mm-hmm. So that kind of just gives you a good picture of it. But yeah, the whole situation, making the deal with the devil, both sides thinking that the other's the devil, to get Lenin to Russia, is I love all of the drama behind that.
And then, like you mentioned, when he arrives at the end, and there's just this sort of like godly reception to him, and it's like, at that point, history's been written. This is the end of everything you've seen up to this point, and this is the start of a new chapter.
Yeah, and it's interesting that that's episode 12, but they still have to deal with the end of the war for Germany. The thing again, you could have just... I think that they should have just started this series in, with Charlemagne and gone all the way to to the end of World War II or something. You could have gone further with it, but still,
you do kind of wish that it was sort of like a Tudors situation where they just focus on one period every season or something.
I mean, I literally could have rolled with that, because they just mention offhandedly in the final episode, Trotsky negotiating at Brest-Litovsk to get the Russians out of the war after the Bolsheviks had taken over. And that's again, that should have been an episode in itself, because all the craziness and all the horrendous shit that goes down with that, is if anyone's wondering, that's why I don't like Trotsky. But just everything that goes down with Brest-Litovsk is so fascinating. They just it's just skipped over as a line of dialogue, and instead the last episode just focuses on the fall of the Kaiser, which again, I didn't even know that really happened. I don't know much about my German history except as it pertains to Russia at this point. So it was kind of crazy to watch everything that happens with him trying to, he makes this deal with the devil, and in his perspective, against the interests of another monarch, in order to try to save his country and still find a path to victory in the war, and it doesn't work. He does this awful thing for his class, and he still loses his empire, and it spells the end of 2 other empires. But
dang.
Which is, again, it's really fascinating, because Lenin's worried about making the deal because it's going to make him look like a German agent, a German spy, and that those are accusations that are thrown at him. And that's why he insists that it's not just the Bolsheviks that come in, that it has to be everybody that's stuck in Sweden, has to, or Switzerland, has to come on this train and go through Germany and get to Russia, so that way it can't be just him. But even then, they try to hush it up as much as possible about how exactly they get there. They don't want any press. They end up getting press anyway. It's not as sealed a train as Churchill likes to make it out to be. but like he's real worried about the perception of it. But in the end, you know, he ends up taking the deal because it's the only way, and they're both making the same calculation of we have to win by any means necessary. And for Lenin, it ends up working out, and for Kaiser Wilhelm II, it doesn't. And I think that's just really, really fascinating to juxtapose them in that manner.
And it does also speak to like that the shift that you see between the divine right to rule to people that are elected, but at the end of the day, the problems that one of them had aren't naturally absolved by the fact that you're no longer given that divine right. Like regardless of how you feel about like Lenin and Stalin or whoever, as bad as a king or the Kaiser or the Tsar could be, all those problems just end up re-entrenching themselves with other figures, even if they're not calling themselves that. And that sort of tragedy by the end of it, where the Lenin stuff feels very nostalgic and hopeful with the way it's done, but there is also like that deeper irony of like this is just a circle leading right back to where you started.
I mean, they call it revolution. There's
Yeah.
a whole other episode about that, about the 1905 stuff and the Tsar trying to like reestablish himself and reestablish his power, because he's like he gives up complete autocracy and allows a representative body. That's the Duma that you see a little bit in episode 12. But then he like keeps like disbanding and reforming the Duma and like recalling elections because he doesn't like who's getting voted in.
That sounds right.
And so there's like a whole episode just focused on a guy that's like a really fucking shady dealer, trying to, you know, move things behind the scenes to get what the Tsar wants, but rig the democracy that he's allowed to be set up to do it and all this stuff. And they like he's having a conversation with a rebel that's in his pay, basically. And this guy's like, again, it's that same like double dealing of like not even sure if this guy is a revolutionary that's just been planted by the police or been bought out by the police, or if he's a revolutionary who's like using the police, you know, them thinking that he's their mole, but he's using them as a mole thing. And there's all this conversation with him, and he's like, so what, you're gonna be the one in charge of things? Now, once things calm down, they'll get rid of me, but the wheel will turn again and I'll be back. And like he that's like his last line of the episode, and he walks out of the apartment, and and like the narrator goes, he was right. Within 6 months, the Tsar did ask for his resignation, but by the time the wheel turned again, he had passed away. It's just like that is the constant joke with revolutions, is they're called a revolution because you go 360 degrees and you're right back where you started.
Yep.
All these changes, all this upheaval happens, and it's not that it doesn't mean that things aren't better off for those changes, but for whatever reason, people feel comfortable with a certain dynamic of power, and you can only change so much at one time before you end up back where you started. Just they get new hats. That's usually how it goes. And the hats never get better. There's like a real bell curve to cool hats in history situation. Like we're way on the other end of it.
Yeah, we're on the lame end at this point.
Yeah.
Man, what I wouldn't give for a cool hat.
I mean, you could get... That's what we need to bring back, is like crazy historical hats. Like I watched fucking Frankenstein, and they had what's his name, Tywin Lannister, come in for like his introduction series wearing those like big ass Napoleon hats. Like, man.
I mean,
That's
even
a cool hat.
Even if you want to like go back just a little bit, right? Like old school detective movies with the fedoras and stuff. We used to be a goddamn country with some real hats.
No, now if you wear a fedora, you're just a neckbeard.
Exactly. We got to reclaim the cool hats.
I'm the one with the Lego hat. You're not doing your part, Steve.
That's fair. I got to get myself something on par with the Lego hat.
Get a Lego, make a Lego top hat, Steve. Be my
Hey,
hero.
I'll make a Gundam top hat.
Oh, that's cool. Oh. Yeah, but so I really like a lot of the historical perspective that this has. I think is really really well done. Um, Something I would have been more interested in is again just broadening it out. I would have liked to see what was going on with the ruling powers in France and England at this time. Pretty sure France still had some level of royal. Well, no, because there's somebody, because I remember hearing about that in one of my French history book that I did, where they talk about the French rulers at the time, and they were monarchs, but yeah, whatever. I think for a while France played around with the idea of just keeping like a figurehead monarch, and just didn't last. Something like that. Um, but yeah, like I would have been interested to see what was going on with them, especially because again, King of England at the time directly related to Nicholas and Willie. So it just feels ridiculous that it didn't happen. They had to like try to hide some of his German ancestry when the war broke out to make him not look, because they were doing all the anti-German propaganda at the time. They didn't want it to reflect badly on the royal family. I don't know. I would have been fascinated to see more of like those dynamics, and you would have gotten like young Churchill at that point too, which would have been kind of cool. Or younger. So I don't know. A lot of those dynamics are just really interesting. Again, I feel like we've only talked about basically the end of the episode with the sealed train, but I really like a lot of what goes on in the episode.
Yeah, it's one of those things where I feel like I wish there was just all the other sides of the conversations or sound equally interesting, and I wish we could spend a little bit of time on everybody. But obviously, if you did that, you'd never get to the end of the series.
Yeah, no. You really could have just done it from Charlemagne on, and I would be fucking here for it. Come on, just a 900-year spanning series. Let's just go for it, guys. But yeah, there's just a lot of cool shit in this. But I think we're through talking about it as much as we're gonna be. It was a fun one. Thanks for watching it with me. Let me ask you this before we wrap up. Did this make you want to go through and like watch the whole series now, or you think you're kind of over it?
It did. It made me want to go back and watch it from the beginning, although it makes me want to like prepare myself a little bit more and see if I can like find some books to read to fill me in on stuff before I start watching it. Because I feel like I'd appreciate it more if I knew more.
Yeah, that's how I kind of felt with the Bismarck stuff. Because like I know of Bismarck, because he kind of like sets the stage for just a lot of what goes on in the 1870s, where like Lenin and Stalin are born. So it like he and Trotsky. So like he just kind of sets the ground for a lot of that stuff, and it becomes really interesting. So it made me want to like go through and read up on Bismarck too. But I think what it does do, it's either like a surprisingly level and like fair series that portrays these things. It's not just playing solely for drama. It's trying to actually balance some of the real history here with just how high stakes and crazy the drama must have been, with just again, accuracy, which is impressive. A lot of things don't like to find that line very well, and I'm all for fun drama, but sometimes it gets to the point where it's actually insulting to the real history, or the real history was somehow more dramatic than the manufactured drama. So I think that it does a good job of either being like a good introduction or a good dramatization if you kind of know the background already. All right, let's go ahead and do a ratings. So for the episodes of Fall of Eagles we watched, we'll not do one for each episode. We'll just do them like as a collective. What would you give a rating for this, Steve?
As a whole, I'd probably give it 4 out of 5 Lenin muttering about the revolution in his sleep.
That's good. I'm also gonna go with Lenin in his bed for mine. I'm gonna give this 4 out of 5 Lenin blue balling his wife in order to talk more about politics. Such a good scene. They're just laying there in bed, and he's like just awake, like wide-eyed, looking at the ceiling. And she's like, "Do you want me? No. Do you want to talk about the political situation?" Just starts fucking ranting. It's literally the meme. Babe, come to bed. No, someone's wrong about proletariat revolution.
You know, if nothing else, right? If there is no other reason to watch the show, it's to watch it so you can hear Patrick Stewart talking about how bad liberal reformers are.
Oh man, it's funny. The algorithm knew I watched this because suddenly it started recommending clips to me in shorts, and one of the clips is just Stewart is don't trust the liberals. They'll always side with the right. I'm like, I just pulled that out last night because my mom was over and we were talking about the Democrats having 0 balls, and I'm like, yeah, listen to Lenin. Don't trust the liberals. They'll always side with the right.
It's never wrong.
It's so good. Oh.
Alrighty.
All right. Everyone, thank you so much for watching. Until next time, I'm the Philosopher.
And I am the Lenin erotica fanfiction lover. I don't know how Matt would have said that.
It would just been the Lenin erotica lover.
That makes sense.
But it sounds like, with my point about him blue balling his wife, it just doesn't feel like that you're gonna have much erotica. It's just gonna be communist propaganda, which is awesome.
yeah. I mean, like the Lenin erotica is just like theories about the state, right?
I don't know, man. Sometimes that communist propaganda do be hitting in a place where maybe I need to turn the lights out while I read this.
Who needs a Playboy when you've got a communist pamphlet?
We're Geeky Gentlemen, and we'll be discussing things. I don't remember if I said it.